Welcome back, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Dad and I are out here trying to figure some stuff out while the turkey is cooking. Um, so we're showing you where we're at currently, and then we'll backtrack and show you how we got there. So what we're trying to do is figure out what all this is supposed to be as far as spacers and tightnesses on everything for these pinion axles, because they bump up against the center section of the differential, and that's what's keeping your differential centered, located, because otherwise that just floats in the Babbitt bearings. So we had to kind of reverse engineer, measure everything. We spent the last day here kind of figuring everything out and measuring and checking worn parts and to figure out what we had, and I figure out what it really should be so everything comes out right, so all the spacings come out right with everything. So what we've figured out is that there should be a phenolic washer on either side of this plate, one here and one on the inside. We'll show you that in a minute. That takes up keeps your pinion axle riding in the location it should be, keeps that centered, so to speak. The parts book just calls that a fiber washer, and it's, what was it, like 94 some thousand thick. So to compensate for wear and stuff on everything, we've figured out that if we find material that's 100 thou thick for either side, works out where everything is basically bumped up tight to the differential. There's takes all the play out of everything. So by the time we add the parts book calls for a 20 thou thick washer, or excuse me, gasket between this part and the housing. By the time we add that, that'll be our 40 thou play differential side to side. Or we can adjust that accordingly. If we only want 20 thou play, well, then we put a 10 thou gasket on either side. But basically, we just had to get to the point of figuring out what material thickness we needed to make these new phenolic washers out of, because the old ones are worn, and like I said, all the other parts are worn. So we can't just use stock sizes or everything would be sloppy. So I think that kind of gives you an idea where we're at here. Now we'll pull apart one side here, and we'll show you all the individual pieces to show you exactly what's going on here. It'll probably make a little bit more sense. Okay, we're going to do our best to explain how this all works now. So we took the left side axle out here to show you how the assembly works. So when it's all apart, it's the easiest way to explain this first. So this is so we're going to make new ones of these because these are worn and the other parts are worn. So we're actually going to make this slightly thicker than original to take up all the play. And I'll explain why in a second here. So that goes like that. That goes like that. And then your gear goes on, and then that holds it all in place. So right now, when this gear is all tight, this is running loose on the shaft, and it should not be. This should be caged tight between the gear, the washer, and your inner race of your bearing. That should all be tight together, and then there is two phenolic washers that go on either side of this pinion axle plate. So that whole axle is rotating. This is staying stationary. So your phenolic washers, that's what's rubbing, so to speak, against your plate here. So right now everything is worn from just being used. So this is running loose. So that's why we're making this slightly thicker to take up that play to bring everything back into tight tolerances. So how they did it at the factory, the best we can tell, is that they would have put in gear on, nut on, tight, put this tight to the gear, put the washer tight to that, put your inner race on, tight to that, and then you take this nut here, this spring wire, lock wire comes out of there, it's just pinned into the axle. They would tighten up that nut until everything was tight, and then they drilled it, and the little wire keeps it in place, because we actually backed that off and looked, and there's only one hole. It's not like it's an adjustable nut or anything. They put it tight, they drilled it, that was it. So in theory, we could do that again. We could tighten this nut up to all of our worn parts, re-drill it, and then in theory that would work, but that's kind of a band-aid fix because the parts are still worn. So by putting a thicker part here, we're keeping everything in the tolerances that they should be from the factory. Hopefully that makes sense. And then that's where, same thing with these old worn phenolic washers, we're making them slightly thicker than they were factory as well to take up for slight wear in parts. But it's pretty minor. Like I said, the original ones were 90-some thou. We're going to make them 100 thou. So it's not like there's a ton of wear on these things. Pretty fortunate, really, with the shape. There's very minimal wear in everything. Did I get everything?
Sounds good.
Did I explain it all right? It's taken us a while to wrap our heads around how it all... It's really not that complicated until you figure it all out. Because I was originally thinking that this was supposed to be a turning fit on there. And then Dad, basically we figured out that, no, that really should be fixed. The only thing that's turning is the washers on the plate. Everything else should be turning with the axle.
That traps the whole axle so it can't go back and forth.
Yeah. So that's what we know right now. We also had the indicator set up, on the axles to check how much play is in the bearings and whatnot, and we're pretty happy with that. There wasn't a ton of play in the bearings, and the run out on the shaft is pretty decent too.
Within 3 thou.
Yeah, 3 thou on one side, and I forget what the other side was, but it was, for what it is, we're happy with that. It's not like the bearings are completely wore out or anything like that. So I don't think I'm going to replace those. I think I'll just run them, and those should be okay. They weren't obviously worn out like the rear axle itself bearings were. They seem to be in a lot better shape. So probably because they were actually turning all the time, where these were just kind of sitting there working on the axle. Like you've said, that's the worst thing for bearings, is not actually spinning. When you got a part that's just little bit,
It's not good. Yeah.
little bit of moving or rocking back and forth, that's really hard on bearings. Where constant turning is actually better for them. So okay, I'll ask you guys for some advice now. These fiber washers, that's all the parts book calls them, as fiber washers. I believe there's some type of like old phenolic, I keep calling them, material. As far as we know at the point of recording this right now, that's probably, if we can find some material of the right thickness, that's probably what we'll use. But does anybody else have any suggestions, advice, recommendations on what type of material we should be using for this application? Like I said, we need something 100 thou thick for these particular washers. It's not really, well, I had one friend ask if it needed to be like a sealing. It doesn't really need to be a sealing surface at all, because even if it does leak, it's just going from the transmission into your final drive housing. And if that lube goes back and forth, that's no big deal. It's actually probably a good thing to lube all those washers and parts. It's not going to leak out of the tractor because that's inside of those backer plates. So it doesn't need to be sealing. It's basically just a wear surface to keep that axle running where it should be, left to right. So if anybody has any advice on that, suggestions, sources for it even, leave a comment below or let me know. I'd gladly like to get some advice there. Okay, since we got this rear drive line all figured out until we get some new parts made, we've moved on to the, let's call it the intermediate shaft now. We pulled that all out again because that was all just kind of tossed in there. I haven't even done final cleanup on all this stuff yet. I gotta wash out all these bearings and all whatnot. But we're gonna clean up everything final here. We'll probably dress up all these gears now that we have them out, all these little chip corners, touch them up a little bit, and then put everything together and figure out spacings and everything as far as how tight everything is there, and figure out a game plan with what we need to do to take up any play in that whole assembly, kind of moving our way forward. So we did final cleanup of the intermediate shaft parts here now. We also did, I did a cleanup of the rear axle plate. Dad brought them out from the Michigan parts tractor. So that one is in a lot better shape than the one that was on the tractor here. So we'll use that one here and we'll be good. We're in the process, we're going to start putting these gears and everything back in this intermediate shaft now to kind of start dry fitting all that and figuring out tolerances and whatnot, see what needs to be fixed if anything. So I was test fitting this cover here and I could see the light of day. So we discovered that the guys at the factory were slacking that day. They machined this and they had a little ridge on the edge here where the edge of this housing was hitting and not sitting flat. I could see the light of day between. So you seen we ground and filed that down so it sits flat now. All these little things to make everything come out together right. Okay, we've been working on brake pulley and brake band and linkages parts. Ran all this stuff through the sandblaster. We got the bands, the old brake material taken off of the bands, straightened out, whatnot. I primed and painted the insides of the bands before we put our new brake material on. So that's all ready to go. This is all the brake lock linkage, and that's the actuators for these, for both tractors. Brake pulley for this tractor, washer and nut that hold it on. We got the new brake material here. We're going to get ready to measure and cut that and figure out how to rivet that on. Got the key in there for the brake pulley. We were working on finalizing this kind of stuff, the keys for the clutch linkage last night. I got the backer plate for one side cleaned up, so we can work on that too, maybe. Getting lots of stuff done here. Okay, we cut our brake material to length. We actually went just a little bit shorter than what the specs in the manual called for. And took off, I don't know where the scrap was, but it was probably about that much longer. Got it C-clamped in place. Now we're going to take and drill holes where all the rivets go, and we'll take it out and then countersink for all the heads of the rivets on the inside, and then riveting will come next. There, one band all riveted on. Just as original, solid rivets on the top two. Little brass hollow rivets everywhere else. Yeah, now we gotta do the second one. We'll show you how we did it here. So after we get it cut to size, we clamp it in place, and then we're just drilling through to mark all the holes. We're set up in the drill press here with a special counter boring bit. We have the depth stop set, so they all go down the same depth into the brake band material. Got a piece of wood as a backer. Put the lining back on there, clamped in place with the holes lined back up. Now we're ready to rivet. That's all there is to it. And then our solid copper rivets are here. The ones we have on hand, the heads are just a little bit too big, so we'll put them in the redneck vise here, or lathe, and make the heads a little bit smaller so they fit. So we got just a punch clamped in the vise as a backer for the head of the rivet. And then the rivet set to squish it all down. Shorten it a little bit. Get to the proper length. We gotta adjust our punch here. Yeah, we had to readjust our punch. It was getting too low, so just raise that up as a better backer, and then use the little rivet head punch to set it, and done and done. Do the other side, and we'll have two brake bands done. Okay, yep. Let's set it down. Cut it to length. Set it again, maybe. Make sure you're seated down right. Yeah,
Nice.
just like that. 2 brake bands. Done. Well, we got the brake assembly mocked up here. You got to use your imagination a little bit, because this one, it actually goes the other way, but we can't do that with this tractor. Anyway, we just got it mocked up backwards with the pulley on and the brake on and all the assembly and roughly adjusted. So there's the dog there. It'd be flipped over the other way. But basically you push down on your brake lever here and then it would ratchet into place to be locked to work your brake band. Parking brake. That all seems good, so I think once we get the new pin and stuff made for the other arm, this one belongs on the tractor in the yard, but once we get those parts made, that whole brake assembly is pretty much done. I didn't put this pulley all the way on because it's going to have to come off again anyway, so I just put it on a little bit just to test it here. Yeah, moving on. So we're going to work on these final drives here a little bit, see if we can rivet that felt on there. First step is we got to make our felt pieces. So what we need is a 3/16 felt, 1.125 wide by 6 foot 6 inches long. All I could get is 1.5 wide felt. So we're going to make up this fixture to rip it down to size. So we just did that. Just made out of some scraps. We'll lay the felt in there. Like so. That goes on top, and then we'll take a knife and rip it to size. We'll rough it to length here first, rip it, and then we'll check back.
Yeah, I don't know how you would.
Go all the way to the end is easier. Or
What?
does it be easier to bring that all the way to the end?
No, it doesn't matter. Ta-da.
Perfectly 1.125 wide strip. That was easy. Well, this is coming out really well. So we got it all in place. We got our scarf joint in the felt on the would be the top of the backer plate, least likely to leak that way. Got all our rivets in there, clamped in place. Really happy with how everything's coming together here. This is a case where it's nice to have a whole box of these little baby clamps that aren't good for anything else, but with these kind of projects, they're really handy to have. Now we just do figure out our riveting process. So we're riveting away here. This is working really well. So we had it all clamped in place. We put our rivets in. We made up a custom tool because of course I didn't have one the right size. There's a factory one for doing the head of the rivets. So we just took a chunk of bar, drilled a hole and drilled a little dimple. So there's to set it in place like so. We got just the anvil up on the bench here. And we got just a scrap of wood and a vise, just something to work on. So we're going to up at a nice working height. Ta-da! Ta-da! Yeah. Like I said, it's coming out really good. We're happy with it. We just rotate to the next one and we'll work our way right around. Remembering to put flush rivets on those two for clearance, like we talked about. So we got some of these, what do you call these kind of rivets? I don't even know what the right name for that is, but those flush-headed rivets. Flat-headed rivets, maybe. Whatever those are, those will go in there and they'll be nice and flush then. There, we are really happy. We're kind of impressed with how well that turned out. That ring is all riveted on there now. Both sides look very nice. Like I said, those two are flush there. I think we'll throw it on the tractor just because we can at this point. There. Looks like we got something done. Pretty impressed. Everything fits nice. So one side is done for now. We can't finish the other side. One, because I got to clean up the backer plate and everything yet. And two, because the holding ring on that side is quite worn in places. So we're hoping that maybe one of the Michigan Parts Tractor rings is in good shape that we can use. If not, we'll make a new part, but we'll check out the Michigan parts first, and then we can finish that side. Then basically once we get a new axle made and we finish cleaning up our final drives, that could all get put back on the tractor then too. Getting closer and closer to a rolling chassis. But yeah, we're impressed. Those flat rivets work really nice for clearance here. And that's where that final drive comes around, so there's clearance there. Nice. Well, I guess that means I gotta clean up this one here next. And then I think clutch will be one of the next things we do. We were taking a little bit of a look at that tonight, but that'll be more for upcoming videos, something for you to look forward to. I'm going to thank you all for watching like I do every week. I really do appreciate all the time you guys spend watching the channel. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, hit the like, share, all that kind of fun stuff. You know the routine. Thanks again. See you guys later.